Man, this comic book sucks! And the reviews online said it was good! I wasted my money! Why didn't somebody tell me?
Three, two. Hey everybody, this is Spinnerack, and we have one more comic review, The New Gods Special Number 1. This first special is with Orion, and it's written by Shane Davis. It's a two-part story plus some extras from Kirby added in there. This is a part of DC's 100th anniversary of Kirby's work, and of course, what a way to do it is with Orion of New Genesis. And this is our story. It opens up with, before we go there, obviously I'm Petey, and we also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock so late in the night.
So, when we last left our hero, Orion, well, in this story, it starts off with, we meet Orion in this, and it's, he looks like Orion, but there's a whole subplot of the bug in this. The bugs are the colony underneath New Genesis are enslaved by Calabac, and they've been put to work and plan to turn New Genesis into like an apocalypse or something of that sort. But he would, Calabac would probably rule. This one just starting from this where I'm at in the story, not where it leads to the end. But one of the things in the New Gods, especially when Kirby was getting towards the end, he introduced this bug colony, and it sort of took away the grandeur of the New Gods because it showed some of the demigod aspect of these characters, that these characters had these failings, whereas first, yes, Orion had this issue, this issue of this dark side, which would come out from time to time, but then having a separate class has sort of tainted the New Gods. So when you see Mark Evener, him do a story on them, he played that up when Jim Starlin did. But this one seems to sort of do a fine line that they have some issue with the bugs in this colony, and but at the same time they're struggling with Calabac, who's doing the worst he can to them and enslaving them and causing them, trying to bring forth the destruction of New Genesis. So then, of course, it leads to a big battle between Calabac and Orion, which is not anything different than we've seen before. But, it's always good to see brothers fight. I got a brother. We fought many a time. So in this one, they go at it. They get Calabac almost to a stop. But then, like it's in the Kirby run, like, what's the name? Who's it? Light Ray is supposed to know he's not supposed to interfere with, with more of the, like a one-on-one battle. So it causes Orion to strike at, break Light Ray's hand, which I'm not sure he would do. He might yell at them because they're such close friends. But, I'll take, it's not a deal breaker. And then the story ends, and then we lead to another one. So another story after that. So what are your thoughts on this issue?
You ever remember they used to do this for the cartoons? I don't know if they still do this, but they would be able to give you an overview of the entire cartoon in the opening. The opening is like maybe 30 seconds, and you'd get to see pretty much the traits of all the characters. You would be introduced to all the characters, any paraphernalia or means of conveyance that were going to be important, and they were able to do that in 30 seconds. That's what this particular comic reminded me of. It is more like a primer for somebody who's never read New Gods or was introduced to any of these characters before. So you got the salient traits of Orion, Light Ray, Calabac, even Highfather, who was there for a hot second, Bug, and so on and so forth. If you know who these characters are, they're pretty much instead characters. There's not a lot of movement, not a lot of plot development in terms of, it's a boilerplate story at the end of the day. To be honest, it reminds me of some of the stuff that Neil Adams was doing in The Return of the Superman or something of that nature, or the Coming of the Superman. It reminded me slightly of that in some of the sequences, probably the art more than anything, since they really did their best to try to adhere to classic forms of how they were represented. But story-wise, this was like, okay, I'm writing this so you can enjoy the story, but so also if you can know who these characters are. We're pretty much treating the audience like they had never been introduced to them before, which, to be honest, I was fine with. I think more comics should be that inviting and open. This is supposed to be an anniversary for Jack Kirby. I don't know how many readers, especially right now, are sanguine, if let alone cognizant of Jack Kirby and his contributions to come. They might know the name and have no idea in terms of the creations and the characters. So this would be, for somebody to, I can't even call it a jumping on point, but this would be a good comic to get somebody started reading with. So I didn't have an issue with that much in terms of the setup.
Yeah, I mean, this one, it's a fine, the lead story feels like a lead story, and it's fine in how it plays out, and then adding something where we've had this battle come close to death maybe 2 or 3 times between Orion and Calabac, and this one has a interesting change where the punishment for this plan without Darkseid is probably not working out is worse than worse than anything being killed. So that's the interesting part of this story. So and they become friends and they make up in the end that Light Ray and Orion and
in writing, we would call something like that a tune-up, where if you hadn't written something in a while, or that was more like that's the type of story they used to when comic books were more widespread. For the new writers, they would give them, oh, why don't you write a story over here, Marvel Fanfare, because you could just do something just to show you had the mechanics, and you build from there. That's what it came across, and I mean, it's no slight to the story. That a lot of times those stories were pretty good. It was just to show that you had the chops to actually write. You understood the characters. You knew how to craft dialogue that wasn't going to be excessive, since it had to be able to fit in a tiny panel for the most part. So that's what it came across. It came across like to me. I mean, on a lot of levels, it was refreshing because I was able just to read it and enjoy it without it going all over the place, because it's trying to on one hand maybe trying to do fan service, or on the other hand there was all this extra backstory that I needed to know in order to be able to explain this. But to be quite frank, if you had never heard of Orion, New Gods, Highfather, Darkseid, any of these guys, this is an example of how you can actually tell the story, introduce the characters without forcing people to have to read 10 issues that came before. Okay, and stoke interest into seeing what comes afterwards.
And they have a backup story. Well, they have a few, but Walt Simonson does the backup. And Walt Simonson did a 25 issue run of Orion, which was supposed to be John Byrne had a run, which was like, well, his run was maybe like 28 issues, and then Orion was supposed to happen right after Byrne's run, but there was a gap in between Walt Simonson's the work he was doing in between there, so it took a while. So it lost maybe a little momentum, but the stories were very strong.
Well, at least it wasn't as bad as that gap between Mr. Miracle, between that last issue of Mr. Miracle, and then it was like it didn't end. It was just they said, oh no, it was on hold. It was on hold for like what, 5 years?
Yeah, it could have been worse. And we got 25 issues, and this story is a throwback to one of the elements in there, which was the Unholy Sea, which is SEE, which is there was many play on words aspect to there's Glorious Godfrey, and there's a bunch of stuff that it was already in there. And whereas John Byrne sort of went to the past and added grandeur to the already grand series, Walt Simonson chose to explore Apocalypse and New Genesis and find other areas, and this being the sea beneath the surface of Apocalypse. Was already interested in the Orion series, and it's fun going back to this and having a young Orion going on this tale with Seagrin. They're going in and they have this thing, and there's a little bit of a twist on why Orion is left alone, and these monsters, this Crake, I guess to throw to was like a Kraken. It's always interesting, the stuff that Walt Simonson used and trying to use from other different past folklore and whatnot, and that sort of thing. Just grabbing from stuff and adding to it and making it more immense in his comic. Because anything Walt does is pretty huge. So it's just a little brief story, which is fun, where you see him underwater and he has plans, but then Segrin has a better plan, and it shows, it opens up Orion's eyes, and it's fun seeing the double splash page and seeing Walt Simonson back on Orion again. So this was all fun for me, this backup story. So what did you think?
It reminded me of how much I enjoyed Walt Simonson's run with Orion, simply because Walt Simonson understands mythology. Probably the biggest thing with mythology is not this unending story. It's finite. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. All the mythological stories have that. Be it the Greeks, Egyptians, the Norse, there's this big battle that's supposed to happen, and that's supposed to decide the future of mankind at the end of the day. And he finally just had the fight that I was waiting to see, because all of the prophecy was that the son and the father were supposed to fight, and he finally did that dark side Orion fight that I had been waiting for. Simonson decided that he was going to fulfill those storylines. That I was like, okay, great. So I was having a lot of fun reading into that, and then it's a small piece out of everything that happened while Simonson was there, but still, I've just found I had a lot of fun reading that, because I was like, okay, great. We're coming into, if I were to take it in acts, this would actually be that third final act. At least with Simonson's Orion run, this would be that third and final act, and then anything else after here would have to be, separate from the fourth world stories. So that's how I always took it. I think Morrison picked it up. He was going to do the whole fifth world thing, but my jury's still out on that. I'd have to read that again.
You can't increase the power of Kirby or that sort of thing in the grandeur that he already did, but you can create and increase the vastness of it. Whereas the punch, they can't equal the power, but they can have someone punch from one, to three buildings, or, some of the stuff that Thor fighting, Sutor and stuff like that. So there's aspects that they did and they had on Kirby's work, whereas, Byrne expanding on, that's possibly the only origin that no one has said, what the, Byrne, you can't do that. They were like, oh, we thought he was just retelling a Kirby story. So, and then at the same time, that's the only point I'm bringing up, is that way Simonson did it was adding grandeur to it, was saying, let's explore, because mostly you have Apocalypse, you have the Fire Pits, and you have Armageddon. And what Simonson is doing, just finding these other areas and these other dimensions in the New Genesis and Apocalypse world. So that's the only thing that I just want to cut to that point. I guess to end this review, there's a little bit of Kirby stuff, because he always did a little bit of short stories. We didn't see much of Lonar, but he's in the end of this. So
you gotta love that name, right? That's a Kirby name if there ever was one, right?
Yeah, and then we have this, I guess, this throwback horse, the Thunderer, comes in, and we have this aspect that Kirby was hinting that there's this, there's something, this beast inside of Orion, which, the horse is reacting to. But it also says that, Orion can, vanquish those memories, which is always, that's the thing I think Simonson got, remembering that he's the key to to the new gods, having Orion be the lead guy. Most of the time, especially Starlin, I always have to say, he just made Orion really petty and really nasty. And there were points in Kirby saying, but the majority of the run, he's, tortured, but he has the human friends. He cares for them. He saved them. He's been gracious to them. He just has moments of a dark side, and I think Kirby he said.
I'm not certain if you meant that tongue in cheek, that he has this dark side. He's the son of Darkseid. He's still this guy from.
Yeah.
Orion is in that classical hero state where he's raised by the surrogate father, but he still belongs to this other world, and he's he has that continuous internal conflict of nature versus nurture. So That's when it's done, and it's done very well. It's great. Other than that, he's just an angry guy. He's just an angry guy flying on that harness of his. Kirby, highlighting it to the point that the horse can sense that rage, that that conflict going on within him, and then to a certain extent, with Orion's last shot, his parting shot, if you will, is like, yeah, never a touch for Orion. Like, everybody's afraid of me, to a certain extent, because as much as he's a part of New Genesis, he doesn't really belong there. And his fate, one of the reasons he's supposed to be able to, I guess, at least the way I've always looked at it, take out Darkseid, is because he's going to be triumphant because he can have that mixture of everything that Darkseid could bring to the table, but also the things that he would learn on New Genesis, as opposed to just Kalibak, who's just going to try to out Darkseid, which is dark. So those type of things right there. I mean, again, it goes to the mythology that I think Kirby understood very well and was trying to tell of those type of characters. Those archetypes that we would find within mythology of those type of characters as well. And we get a good sampling of it right here. Better with the Kirby stuff, I think, than what Shane Davis did. But Shane Davis's work is, again, opening up, the world of, the world of the New Gods and the whole Firth World stories.
Thanks, Spinnerak. You saved me money.